Welcome to today's podcast. We're going to be talking about Thomas Hardy's Convergence of the Twain. I'm actually really bummed that I can't do this with you in person because it's one of my favorite poems to talk about with students. I love watching students figure out the interesting meanings in it. But alas, here we are, and we're going to make do with what we have. So let me tell you what we're going to do in this video. We are going to talk about the poem as a whole. I'm going to take you to a couple of these sites to give you some background history about the poem, and then we'll scoot on over to our little document camera, and I'll do some annotating with you. So if you'd like to print one of these out on your own and join me, it's not a bad idea. You'll find it on Haiku. After we do this, I would like for you to open up the PDF that I gave you, the Master AP English Literature PDF. You should have it downloaded. And we're going to practice all this poetry stuff that we've been doing on a multiple choice portion. It's going to be Sonnet 55, questions 1 through 10. So I'll talk to you a little more about that, but let's jump into the poem. Okay, so Thomas Hardy writes this about the loss of the Titanic. And it's an occasion poem, like we've studied before, written specifically for a fundraiser that was taking place about a month after the Titanic sank. So it was obviously very fresh on the minds of everyone, held in New York. And it was intended, this poem was printed on the fundraising pamphlet, and it was intended to raise money for the survivors. So we'll come back to that in a second. I would like to point out these two links. You'll be able to access them through Haiku. They're really helpful. Let me show you this one first. If I can get here, I might have to do the whole, yeah. Sorry, I'm not so super fancy like some of your other teachers. There we go. Okay, so as you can see, this is an interactive website about the Titanic. It's really, really interesting and fascinating. I would like for you to take a few minutes to click around here with the birth of the Titanic. You'll see a few things, some images mainly that are, I think, really fascinating about how the ship was constructed. So if you click on that, you can go and kind of just browse these pictures and just see how massive it was as it was being made. That's right there, I believe, in the engine room. You'll see the hull of the ship. It's just phenomenal how huge it is. This right here, I'm just kidding, crew and passengers, sorry. This will take you through some information about the passengers, and it gives you some pictures if you're interested at all. But I definitely want you to take a little time to browse through this, because the poem is going to talk about how the ship was constructed. In fact, we'll just go through it real quick. I'll click through a few of these. See how just giant it is. At the time, it was considered unsinkable. I know you've heard all these stories, but it was pretty phenomenal. You can click down here and go to the disaster. This actually talks about the sinking of the ship. The impact being the iceberg that actually hit the ship, some renderings, some drawings of where it hit the ship, as you can see here. And it's got some actual images of the telegraph that was sent explaining that the ship was going down, and then some of the actual documentation of that. So that's really actually pretty interesting. This shows some images of people as they were either getting on the lifeboats or not. And then the aftermath has to do with in New York, how people were responding to the sinking of the Titanic. It was an enormous story, as you might imagine. Thousands of people lost loved ones, and it was a huge deal, and it really got to the core of what man was capable of, and what they weren't. So here we go. Let's read the poem, and we'll annotate it. And I'm sorry if this is a little bit of a long video. I'll try my best to go through it quickly. Okay, Convergence of the Twain by Thomas Hardy. If you'll notice, it's got 11 different stanzas. They're all very short. I'm going to read them to you, and I want you just to listen to the way that the rhyme works and see what you can notice. Okay, in a solitude of the sea, deep from human vanity, and the pride of life that planned her, stilly couches she. Steel chambers late the pyres of her salamandrine fires, cold currents thrid, and turn to rhythmic tidal lyres. Over the mirrors meant to glass the opulent, the sea worm crawls, grotesque, slimed, dumb, indifferent. Jewels in joy designed to ravish the sensuous mind lie lightless, all their sparkles bleared and black and blind. Dim moon-eyed fishes near gaze at the gilded gear and query, what does this vaingloriousness down here? Well, While was fashioning this creature of cleaving wing, the imminent will that stirs and urges everything prepared a sinister mate for her, so gaily great, a shape of ice, for the time far and disassociate. And as the smart ship grew in stature, grace, and hue, in shadowy silent distance grew the iceberg too. Alien they seemed to be, no mortal eye could see the intimate welding of their later history, or sign that they were bent by paths coincident, on being anon twin halves of one august event. Till the spinner of the years said now, and each one hears, and consummation comes and jars two hemispheres. Okay, take a moment to pause this recording, and if you've printed out the poem, just spend maybe 5 minutes annotating. I want you to annotate the rhyme scheme that you can notice. I want you to underline or circle the words that are unclear to you, and I want you to just kind of give a first impression. See if you can kind of follow what Hardy seems to be doing. What's your first impression? Okay, once you're done, click play again and bounce over, and we'll do a little bit of annotating on our own, but we're not going to really come to terms with this poem until we're back together again on Friday. All right, if we are going to take a look at this poem, I want you to notice a few things. I'm just going to hit the highlights so that when we're together, we at least have a baseline to work with and we don't have to reread everything. This poem can be a little intimidating. It's intentionally difficult to read. It's difficult, and it's meant to be that way. And when Hardy read it and presented it, it was very shocking because it wasn't at all about soothing the passengers or those who survived, but it was an indictment basically of modern man. So let's start by just taking a look at the title. The Twain is one of those archaic words that it means two, joining of the two. It was actually a nautical term, which fits nicely with the Titanic. Convergence is from the Latin, I think it's coincidence. And it means converging, like bringing two things together. So before we even get to the poem, Hardy gives us the indication that we're going to be talking about two things, and the we know is going to be the ship and the iceberg. He's going to be talking about these two things coinciding, coming together, converging. Okay, so stanza one, we're just going to take it stanza by stanza. In a solitude of the sea, deep from human vanity, and the pride of life that planned her, stilly couches she. Okay, she being the ship. And she is couched deep from human vanity at the bottom of the sea. So it's interesting to note that at the bottom of the sea is really the only place away from human vanity, and it's in that solitude that the ship is now couched. And she's also couched not only from human vanity, but also from, this is an interesting term, the pride of life that planned her. Her, again, being the ship. So when we looked at those pictures, or you looked at those pictures of the construction of the Titanic, it's interesting that Hardy calls the people who built her the pride of life, and that they didn't build her, they planned her. So it almost kind of it just, I don't know how to exactly phrase it, but it indicates, I guess, that he's not necessarily blaming the builder or the architect, or but he's blaming mankind. It's a bit of a larger construct, and we'll kind of come back to that. But this notion of pride is not the last time you're going to see Hardy mention that, and it's interesting that he capitalizes these. Okay? Stanza 2. Steel chambers, late the pyres of her salamandrine fires, cold currents thrid and turn to rhythmic tidal lyres. Here's an example of how punctuation really helps you understand poetry. So steel chambers is the main thing that we're going to be talking about in this stanza. So steel chambers used to be, late, the pyres, like the funeral pyre that we talked about before, how the Vikings used to send their dead off to the afterlife. So late the pyres of her, being the ship, salamandrine fires. So the steel chambers are the things, you guys are gonna have to pardon my crude drawing, but you know, like the on the top of the Titanic, you've seen pictures, I know, and like, so like Jack and Kate are up here and their heart will go on and it's awesome. But over here are where is like the steam chambers. These are the steel chambers right here. And so they're saying steel chambers, which used to be the pyres of her salamandrine fires, they're the things that used to fire the ship, okay? Already in the poem's second stanza, we're connected to the notion that these are soon to be, it's foreshadowing, the funeral pyres of the people on the ship. And salamandrine is a weird word. It's strange. It's referring to a salamander, and a salamander is an amphibian. So it's kind of a cruel, ironic little twist of fate here, I guess, that the amphibian, where the salamander used to be or is amphibious, the people in the ship obviously aren't. And they also could regenerate, which may be kind of interesting as well. Nature, you'll see an abundance of natural imagery coming up. Okay, so inside these steel chambers, which used to hold the fires, cold currents now, and that's talking about like the current of the ocean. Cold currents go through and turn to rhythmic tidal lyres. Tidal being waves, lyres being like a lyre is like an old like an old guitar almost. It's a stringed instrument, and so the cold currents are now going through these steel chambers because it's at the bottom of the ocean. And now it's almost like the currents are plucking and playing music through these, what used to create engine room, what used to be an engine room, okay? Stanza 3. Over the mirrors meant to glass the opulent, the sea worm crawls, grotesque, slimed, dumb, indifferent. Okay, here we have an interesting development. He's now going to go, so he talks about where, first stanza, where the ship is at the bottom of the sea. Now he's going to go and look at certain parts of the ship to explain and kind of get his point across, ultimately, that human pride and vanity played a big role in the sinking of the ship. Not only a big role, but it cemented its fate. So he begins by looking at the steel chambers. Then he looks inside the boat, okay, inside the ship, over the mirrors meant to glass the opulent. Hopefully at this point, and if you haven't, pause this, okay, and go look at some of the pictures of, in fact, let me show you where to go. If you go here, this first link, it's going to take you to, any minute now, it's going to take you to a picture gallery, here we go, of Titanic before and after, like what it looked like before, and if you click these pictures, it'll show you what it looks like now at the bottom of the ocean. And this is a great resource to look at when you're reading this poem, because Hardy is showing you when the makers were planning the Titanic, they had great plans, and now it's, watch this picture. Oh, of course, this advertisement, sorry, try to skip it. Now you'll see the same propeller at the bottom of the ocean, and it's really eerie. Okay, so let me get back to here. So over the mirrors meant to glass the opulent meaning rich, exorbitant, the sea worm now crawls. So there's intense irony here. The sea worm being something of insignificance. It is grotesque, it is slimed, it is dumb, it is indifferent. That might be surprising because usually it seems like maybe he was going to praise nature, but in a way he's just kind of saying that nature is indifferent. Nature is removed. It wasn't nature's fault that this happened. It was, in fact, man's. Okay. Stanza 4. Jewels in joy, and I think you'll notice all the alliteration going on here. Jewels in joy designed to ravish the sensuous mind. And that's interesting because usually sensuous and ravish are connected with the body, but this is the mind. So maybe that has to do with reason? I don't know. So these jewels lie lightless, all their sparkles bleared and black and blind. So he's getting even more specific, talks about the mirrors, and then he goes to some of the artifacts or the things that were actually in the Titanic. And I don't know if you've studied it much, but it was ridiculous what some of the upper class suites had in them, just jewel-encrusted mirrors and hairbrushes and all sorts of just crazy, ridiculous things inside the staterooms. So now he's saying these jewels that were designed to ravish the sensuous mind, maybe that appealed to our sense of entitlement, I'm not sure. Now they lie lightless. Again, irony. They lie lightless, and all their sparkles are bleared and black and blind. We see intense amounts of alliteration here, leading us to this kind of notion of all is lost. Okay. Dim moon-eyed fishes near gaze at the gilded gear and query, ask, what does this vaingloriousness down here? Down here is the sea. This vaingloriousness is referencing these things that Hardy just mentioned. The vaingloriousness is referencing the jewels and the mirrors, and now the moon-eyed fishes and the sea worms are both looking at it like it's so out of place. It doesn't make any sense in their world. It really doesn't make any sense in our world if you think about it. The gilded gear, gilded, you know what that is if you've taken a history class, has to do with the gilded age of being opulent. And query, what does this vaingloriousness? This is a word you're not going to hear very often. It's kind of it just means ridiculousness, vain being in the root of it. Okay. Well, and if you'll notice, here's a change, here's a shift. So far Hardy has done this. He's established that underneath the sea, the Titanic lies, and he mentions the steel chambers, and he shows the irony happening there. He mentions the mirror, what they were meant to do, and shows what's happening to them now, ironic. He shows the jewels, what they were designed to do, and he shows that they are now wasting and ironic. And he shows that everything in nature is looking at it and thinking how ridiculous it is. And now he's going to answer this question. What does this vaingloriousness down here? In other words, why did it happen? What does it mean? Who can we blame? Okay? So here's Hardy's answer, and I think it's kind of going to be, it's a little shocking, or at least I know it was to his audience. Well, while was fashioning this creature of cleaving wing, the immanent will that stirs and urges everything, and you have to use a little bit of enjambment here. If you'll notice, he's ended all of his stanzas here with end punctuation, except this one doesn't, so you have to continue the thought. So while was fashioning this creature of cleaving wing, this is an interesting something to think about with syntax. It's called inverted, like Yoda speak, right? Backwards. There is no try, there is only do. So while was fashioning this creature of cleaving wing, the structure is this. While this creature of cleaving wing, the ship, okay, while the ship was fashioning. Fashioning means to be put together. And it's almost as if the ship itself was putting itself together, was kind of knitting itself together. So almost like, if you look back here, the pride of life, it's this notion, it's bigger than just the people who did it. It's more us in general. And this is where it gets kind of weird, okay? So the ship itself was almost like coming together on its own. And while that was happening, the immanent will, and this spelling is interesting. I'd like for you to look that up and see what you can find about it. Capitalized, that stirs and urges everything prepared a sinister mate. Most students want to call this God. But if you know anything about Hardy, which I'm not sure if you do, you might know that he wasn't exactly, he didn't really believe in the same kind of God as we think of as a Christian God. The immanent will is more of a kind of this combination of a cosmic force. It's like fate, and you'll see a reference to the fates in just a minute. It's this just notion of will or existence. So it's kind of a quasi-God, but it's a little bit more open-ended than that. So he's not blaming God. He's just saying the universe, I guess you could say, something that stirs and urges everything prepared a sinister mate. And you're going to see what that sinister mate is in just a sec. And it prepared a sinister mate for her, so gaily great, a shape of ice, for the time far and disassociate. So the immanent will, so something was preparing the whole time that the pride of life was making the ship, was preparing so gaily great, that's another time ironic kind of aside, a shape of ice. Notice that this is capitalized too, so the iceberg is being prepared the same time that the ship is being planned. There's that kind of passive voice use, and when you use passive voice, it shifts blame. Okay. A shape of ice for the time far and disassociate. So in other words, like during the time that the ship was being built, the ice was being made, but it wasn't going to be used for a long time, like disassociate, so far, far away, not associated immediately with what you might be thinking. Okay, and as the try that again. As the smart ship grew in stature, grace, and hue, that always reminds me of our mission statement. As the smart ship grew, smart as in good looking, in stature, grace, and hue, in shadowy, silent distance grew the iceberg too. So it's really ominous right here. Ominous tone, the use of alliteration, the smart ship in stature, but the shadowy, silent distance. So it's a kind of all connected, that alliteration. That's a kind of a good, if you ever need to see what alliteration does, this is a good example of how it connects these two things that were meant to meet in destruction. Okay, alien they seemed to be, the two, the iceberg and the ship, that if you'll remember, we talked about, where's my first page? We talked about those two things, the twain that were meeting. Alien they seemed to be, no mortal eye could see the intimate welding of their later history. So it came as a shock to everyone. No one really saw it coming. And no one, even at this point, really saw that it was the imminent will that brought these two together. Everyone was trying to blame something else. And he is saying it's bigger than what you're saying. And the intimate welding of their later history, that is a haunting image. Welded, something that can't be broken. And you're going to see that this intimate is interesting too. Here's where it gets really weird. Okay? Hang on to your hats. Again, enjambment, he wants you to connect this to this. The intimate welding of their later history or sign, so no mortal eye could see the welding or sign that they were bent by paths coincident on being anon twin halves of one august event. August doesn't mean as in month, it means as in important, heavy, significant, filled with portent. Anon is one of those kind of archaic words, and honestly, I just lost my mind as to what it means, so we're going to cheat. Let's see if we can do this. Okay. This is the real trick to being a good teacher. Okay, shortly. Yeah, anon. Okay, sorry, my bad. So, let's get back here. So, anon, shortly, or on being shortly, twin halves of one August event. So you're going to see intimate, you're going to see twin halves, like the two becoming one. Paths coincidence, like a wedding path, walking down the aisle. So no one saw it coming. They never saw this happening, even though the imminent will had planned it. Until, they didn't see it until the spinner of the years, we have to think that that's the same will that he was mentioning earlier, said now. And each one hears, and consummation comes and jars two hemispheres. Okay, I'm going to be completely honest. I don't know exactly what this last stanza means. Some scholars have some insight, and I'm going to try to give you my best guess. The spinner of the years, being the will, is the one who pulls the trigger and says, now. He's been planning this all along. And each one hears. If you'll notice, all of a sudden we have a shift to present tense. I don't really know why. I have a theory, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Each one, that's weird. Who is hearing what? I'm going to have to guess that it's the iceberg and the ship, because that's the two we've been talking about up here. And so each one hears that it's time to join, and consummation comes. Consummation is a word that's referenced. It's used when a marriage is finalized by intercourse, by the man and the woman. A marriage is not considered legal, really, or binding until the marriage is consummated, which is weird, A. And B, it's really weird that Hardy is using it to describe this welding, this intimate welding, this sensual, intimate welding of the iceberg and the ship. So it's like they hear and they obey. It wasn't accidental. and consummation comes and jars, and that's a very kind of rough imagery, two hemispheres. So I'm guessing those are the hemispheres. I think you could also look at the hemispheres as the natural world and man's pride, because ultimately this seems to be a poem that's very it's an indictment, I guess, of pride and of thinking that we can outsmart nature in any way. So this is Hardy's Convergence of the Twain. I might ask you just a couple questions that we'll talk about for a few minutes when we start class on Friday. Something to think about. What do you think these numbers mean? Why are they Roman numerals? And why does he end at 11? What else did we want to talk about? What did you see about the rhyme scheme? And why might that matter? And then what do you think his tone is? Like, that's it's a tough question, but it's a good one. What do you think his tone is and why? So if you'll kind of think about these questions, then I will look forward to seeing you guys on Friday and hearing what you have to say. All right. Peace out.